going to continue with a participatory approach to this session, but now we'd like to shift the focus slightly to talk a little bit about the whole question of researching poverty. And we want to talk a little bit about how we went about researching poverty and inequality in Life on the Breadline. As Stephanie suggested a little bit earlier, this session, like the last, will be participatory, and what we're hoping to do is to follow following structure. Just a word or two about, in general terms, about researching poverty during our Life on the Breadline research, then talking and handing on to Stephanie to talk about some of the challenges of researching poverty, and then after we've talked about the methodological approaches that we've taken to our research, we then want to use breakout rooms again, and then return for some reflections from each of those breakout groups. So, in terms of our own research within Life on the Breadline, what have we done and how have we done it? Well, the first thing I'd like to say is to draw your attention to those numbers on the screen. Life on the Breadline is a multidisciplinary research project drawing on the social sciences, and in particular, social and human and cultural geography and political theology. It's largely driven by the methodologies we find within contextual theology. And at the level of academic theology, Life on the Breadline is, to date, the first major sustained evidence-based analysis of Christian responses to poverty during the age of austerity that's been led by academic theologians. And we wanted, within this project, to root what we are talking about today, root the findings of the project very much in a serious commitment to fieldwork. And that fieldwork has combined insights from theology and the social sciences. We've interviewed national church leaders, 16 national church leaders from approximately a dozen different Christian denominations in the UK. And by national church, in this context, what we're meaning within Life on the Breadline is a church, a denomination, a Christian tradition that has a significant presence in more than one geographical area within the United Kingdom. So it's not a localized church, but a church that has a national footprint. So we've interviewed 16 national church leaders. We also wanted to move to the regional level, and so have engaged with 104 regional church leaders from England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, who completed an online survey focusing on the themes we're exploring in Life on the Breadline. So those were semi-structured interviews with national church leaders, an online survey of regional church leaders, and then to complete the picture, we've drawn heavily on what's often referred to as ethnography, standing with, being alongside, sitting with communities, organizations, groups of people for an extended period of time. So we developed 6 case studies that drew on ethnographic methods: participant observation, being with people, focus groups, having conversations similar to those we had in the World Cafe session a few minutes ago, and interviewing the people that we work alongside and sit alongside in those case studies. 2 case studies were developed in Birmingham, 2 were developed in Manchester, and 2 were developed in London. I should say very, very clearly that within this project, the focus has been on urban poverty, and in particular, our case studies have focused on those 3 large cities of Birmingham, London, and Manchester. That is not to say that research into outer city estates, smaller towns, or rural poverty is not important. It is absolutely vital. It's simply to say that in this project, the focus has been on urban poverty and large cities. Those 6 case studies have also highlighted different aspects of poverty, as will become clear in the next slide. In total, therefore, at a formal level, we engaged with, on top of those church leaders and that you can see on the screen, 190 formal research participants and approximately 350 informal research participants. We felt that our research needed to be rooted in evidence, rooted in experience, rooted in fieldwork, and focused very much on people's experience and listening to the experience of people's experiences of poverty. We wanted to take seriously levels of religious capital and the role that churches and other faith groups play at the local neighbourhood level. I'm going to hand on to Stephanie now, who's going to say a little bit more about some of the challenges that we faced as we have researched poverty and life on the breadline.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so these challenges are ones that, as Chris has just said, we faced during the project, but I think will also be ones that other people can resonate with and things that perhaps we can discuss in the breakout rooms. So overall, it's important to emphasize, I think, that poverty is an incredibly sensitive topic, and it has a massive impact upon people's daily lives. So just like other aspects of research, but particularly for poverty, that requires particular care for how you're talking to people and how you go about research, because if it's done in the wrong way, then that could cause hurt, which would be unethical in research terms. So some of the challenges first are, and these aren't really in any particular order of priority, but a challenge of how to sensitively explain the research to people that you're trying to do, to ask, particularly if it's someone that's experiencing poverty themselves, how are you going to explain what you want to do without stigmatizing or labeling someone? If you went up to someone in the street and said, "Hi, I'm researching poverty, you look poor, can I talk to you?" That would be a dreadful thing to say. You can't say it in those terms. So it's thinking about how you approach people, but in a sensitive way. And that leads to the second question of whether to actually use the word poverty or not. And that's something that's been drawn out in our different case studies, and that we'll talk a bit more tomorrow in the workshop on asset-based community development, particularly something that's come out in our case study with Hodge Hill Church in Birmingham, is how the word poverty itself can be very stigmatizing and can be quite almost self-determining sometimes, that you're saying this is what someone's experiencing and this is what their future looks like. People might make assumptions, particularly of stereotypes from the media, as to what being in poverty looks like and what it means. But at the same time, if you are researching poverty, you can't be disingenuous and not acknowledge that that's what you're researching. So we had a challenge there of the title of the research being Life on the Breadline. And so wanting to include people's stories and experiences of poverty within that, but not necessarily saying, can I interview you for a project of Life on the Breadline? But ultimately, if it's going to be used under that heading, it's important that people know what they're signing up for. So it's being open with people, but doing that in an appropriate manner that depends on the situation. Another challenge we've talked already about the scale of poverty in the UK. So another challenge is who to actually speak to, both in terms of people who are experiencing poverty and who is responding to poverty. So it was difficult to choose our 6 case studies because there's so many different projects and gatherings and initiatives and charities and organizations that we could have worked with, to narrow that down to 6, because you can't do everything. was a real challenge. So we decided to focus on different aspects of poverty. So each of our case studies with, as you can see on the screen, B30 Food Bank, Hodgshaw Church, Inspire Centre, Church Action on Poverty, Notting Hill Methodist Church, and Power the Fight. They each emphasise a different aspect of poverty. And that's been really important, particularly from the social sciences. There's a lot of research done specifically on food poverty. We wanted to broaden that focus so that we weren't just looking at food. That leads me to the next challenge of a variety in disciplinary understandings of fieldwork. So as Chris mentioned, Life on the Breadline has been a multidisciplinary research project, particularly combining Chris, Robert and Peter as theologians with myself as a social scientist and a geographer. And there's a challenge there in researching poverty of what each of us mean by fieldwork and what assumptions that we make and perhaps don't even realise that we make of how to go about doing fieldwork and then writing up fieldwork. So a method like ethnography is in some respects pretty common in geography and the social sciences, but less so within theology. So that's been one of the contributions of this research. And finally, that brings me to the last point of emphasising the advantages of ethnography for researching poverty and engaging with these challenges. And I would argue that once you've spent time with people to understand their experiences, whether that's experiences of responding to poverty or being in poverty, or a mixture of both, because of course someone could be in both of those situations. Ethnography is a really good way, I would argue, to get to know someone's experience that goes to more depth than you can get at just with a one-off interview or a survey. So that's been both a challenge and a strength of the Life on the Breadline research, that we've combined semi-structured interviews, the survey, and the 6 case studies with short-term ethnographies. So that's a whistle-stop tour of some of the challenges, going into some of the advantages at the end. We're now going to split into breakout rooms for approximately 20 to 25 minutes, and there's 3 questions that we'd like you to discuss. The questions are: what are your experiences of researching poverty or taking part in research? What challenges do you see in researching or being involved in research into poverty in the UK? And how could researchers and practitioners better work together to research and understand poverty in the UK?
Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for those insights. We could spend a long time talking about a number of the points that you shared, but let's just close by looking at Katie's image that she's drawn for us: researching poverty, methodology and challenges. Katie's referred to the work that we've been doing within the Life on the Breadline research, bringing together theology and the social sciences, an important but sometimes challenging connection between different disciplines that have different approaches and different attitudes and different methodological stances. But one of the great strengths, I believe, of our Life on the Breadline research, Katie reminds us that we've engaged with national church leaders, regional church leaders, and case studies at a local level. We then looked, Katie's talked to us about some of the challenges, and you look, in inverted commas, poor. There's a word that we've not kind of deconstructed, the actual use of the word poor, need for sensitivity, the stigmatizing of people experiencing poverty and potentially communities that are written off as poor communities. We then talked a little bit about some of the strengths of the approach that we've taken, the ethnographic approach to digging deeper and finding out more. So less stereotyping, reciprocity, and action. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for sharing in what feels like just the beginning of a conversation about researching poverty. Thanks everybody very much indeed.